Your coding standards are obsolete. It's time for someone who understands modern architecture." Austin's words sliced through the conference room, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. My colleagues averted their eyes, as if watching someone's public execution. 15 years of dedication reduced to a single humiliating dismissal in front of the entire engineering team at NetSpan Analytics. I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks, but I kept my expression neutral. The termination papers slid across the polished oak table toward me, Austin's manicured fingernails tapping impatiently on the wood. Instead of protesting, I simply nodded, collected the document, and rose from my seat. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Geraldine?" Austin asked, his voice dripping with false concern for the benefit of our audience. "No, thank you for the opportunity," I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I gathered my belongings, turned on my heel, and walked out of the conference room with my head held high. My name is Geraldine Knox. I'm 53 years old, and until 20 minutes ago, I was the senior software architect at NetSpan Analytics in Columbus, Ohio. For 15 years, I've been the backbone of this operation, developing the custom database framework that powers everything from client data warehousing to analytics delivery for hundreds of enterprise clients. As I packed my belongings into a cardboard box, memories flooded back. Late nights debugging critical systems, weekend work sessions to meet impossible deadlines, and the countless innovations that had turned a struggling startup into a powerhouse in the SaaS industry. Each item I placed in the box represented years of dedication to a company I believed in. Douglas, one of the junior developers I'd mentored, lingered awkwardly by my desk. "This isn't right, Geraldine. They can't just—" "It's okay," I interrupted gently. "Things change. Companies evolve. But your database architecture is the backbone of everything we do here," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder to ensure Austin wasn't within earshot. I smiled, a genuine one this time. "Yes, it certainly is. What Austin Merrick didn't know, what he never bothered to research before his dramatic power play, was that I had developed NetSpan's proprietary database structure under a separate consulting agreement during the company's early years. Back then, they couldn't afford to hire me full-time, so we arranged a contract that explicitly stated I retained licensing rights to the architecture unless purchased outright, which never happened. As I walked toward the elevator, box in hand, I felt oddly calm. I had built NetSpan's foundation brick by brick, and now Austin was about to learn what happens when you kick away the cornerstone without checking if it's load-bearing first. I'd been with NetSpan Analytics since before it was even called NetSpan. Back in 2008, when James Holloway approached me with his vision for a revolutionary data analytics platform, the company consisted of 3 people working out of a renovated garage. James had the business concept, but needed someone who could build a database architecture capable of handling massive datasets while delivering lightning-fast analytics. "We can't afford to hire you full-time yet," James had admitted during our first meeting. "But I know your work from Trevanta Corp. You're exactly who we need." We drafted a consulting agreement that allowed me to develop the database architecture while maintaining my intellectual property rights. Paragraph 17, subsection C specified that I retained full licensing rights to the underlying framework unless NetSpan purchased those rights explicitly, a provision James agreed to without hesitation, promising to revisit once they secured their Series A funding. As NetSpan grew, that promise faded. Series A funding came and went, followed by Series B, then a successful IPO. James eventually moved on to become chairman of the board, leaving day-to-day operations to a succession of CEOs who knew nothing about my arrangement. The licensing agreement became buried in the company archives, forgotten by everyone, except me. I never pressed the issue because I loved my job. I expanded and refined the database architecture over the years, turning it into a seamless system that handled everything from data ingestion to visualization. My work became so integrated into NetSpan's operations that few people understood how deeply my code was embedded in every aspect of the company's offerings. Then, Austin Merrick arrived 6 months ago, bringing a wave of disruption with him. At 34, He was the youngest director of engineering in the company's history, recruited from a trendy Silicon Valley startup with promises of modernizing our legacy systems. In meetings, he spoke in a constant stream of buzzwords: microservices, blockchain integration, serverless architecture, while dismissing the robust systems that had served our clients reliably for years. "We need to pivot toward a more agile framework," became his mantra, though he never specified what that meant. I tried to work with him, explaining the elegant complexity of our database structure and how it could be evolved without the risks of a complete overhaul. But Austin saw my caution as resistance, my experience as obstinance. In his eyes, I represented the old guard, a barrier to his vision of transformation. "The tech industry waits for no one, Geraldine," he told me during our last one-on-one meeting, barely looking up from his phone. "Either adapt or get out of the way." I never imagined he'd make the choice for me, but perhaps it was inevitable from the moment he walked through Netspan's doors. The house felt unusually quiet when I arrived home that afternoon. I placed my box of belongings on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of wine, then settled into my favorite armchair to process what had just happened. 15 years of my professional life had ended in less than 15 minutes. My phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from concerned colleagues expressing their shock and support. I appreciated their sentiment but wasn't ready to respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and navigated to my personal cloud storage, where I kept copies of all my important documents. The consulting agreement from 2008 was right where I'd left it, alongside meticulous documentation of my intellectual property contributions over the years. I read through the contract again, confirming what I already knew. The licensing provisions were crystal clear, drafted by an attorney who specialized in technology intellectual property. According to Section 29, if my employment were terminated, the company would have 30 days to either purchase the full license or negotiate continued use of the architecture. Without either action, the system would automatically revert to evaluation mode, limiting functionality until licensing was resolved. I'd built this failsafe into the core framework, not as a trap, but as protection for a scenario I hoped would never materialize. The mechanism was documented in the technical specifications I'd submitted to Netspan years ago, though I doubted anyone in the current leadership had read them. My phone rang, displaying James Holloway's name. I hesitated before answering. "Geraldine, what the hell happened? I just heard from Patricia in Human Resources." James and I had drifted apart over the years as he focused on board-level responsibilities, but we still maintained a cordial relationship. "Austin decided my services were no longer required," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Said my coding standards were obsolete." James swore under his breath. "That's absolute nonsense. Did you remind him about the licensing agreement?" "No, I didn't. He made his decision quite publicly, in front of the entire team. It didn't seem like the appropriate time to bring up contract details." There was a long pause. "Geraldine, you realize what this means for the company?" "I do. Better than anyone." "What are you planning to do?" I took a sip of wine, considering my response. "Nothing, James. Absolutely nothing. The system will do exactly what it was programmed to do when the licensing verification runs on Saturday. I'm simply going to let events unfold naturally." "Austin has no idea, does he?" "He never asked, never reviewed the architecture documentation, never consulted with anyone who understood the foundation of the systems he's so eager to replace." I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "His first big move is scheduled for Saturday morning, a system-wide update that he claims will revolutionize our processing capabilities. Perfect timing, wouldn't you say?" James sighed heavily. "This is going to be a disaster." "Yes," I agreed. "It certainly will be." After hanging up, I sat quietly, watching the sunset through my living room window. I felt no joy in what was about to happen, only a profound sense of disappointment that it had come to this. Saturday morning, I woke up early despite having nowhere to be. 15 years of 6 o'clock alarms had conditioned my body to rise with the sun, regardless of circumstances. I made coffee and brought my laptop to the kitchen table, not to check on NetSpan. I didn't need to, but to update my resume. At precisely 7 a.m., Austin's scheduled system update would begin. By 7:30 a.m., when the licensing verification routine ran its regular weekly check, NetSpan's entire platform would grind to a halt. No data queries, no client dashboards, no reports. Just a simple error message. License validation failed. I wondered how long it would take them to understand the problem. The error message was deliberately generic, designed to appear as a routine system check rather than a licensing enforcement mechanism. The technical logs would contain more specific information, but would anyone at NetSpan know where to look? At 7:45 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed Douglas's number. "Geraldine, thank goodness you answered. We're in complete meltdown mode here. Nothing's working." His voice was strained, the background noise suggesting chaos. "What happened?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Austin pushed his big update this morning, and now the entire system is down. Every client is getting error messages. The support lines are jammed. Austin's blaming the database architecture, saying your code must have failed." "Of course he was." "I see. He's got everyone searching through your documentation, but nobody understands it like you do. Is there any chance—" "I'm sorry, Douglas. I'm no longer employed by NetSpan. I can't help." My tone was gentle but firm. "But you built this system. You're the only one who—" "Douglas," I interrupted, "this isn't your problem to solve. Trust me on that." After hanging up, I took a deep breath. Part of me felt guilty about the junior developers like Douglas caught in the crossfire, but they would weather this storm. It wasn't about them. By 9 a.m., the calls were increasing in frequency and desperation. I let most go to voicemail, but answered when I saw James's number. "The board is convening an emergency meeting," he said without preamble. "Austin is trying to paint this as a catastrophic failure of your database architecture rather than a licensing issue." "Does he even understand it's a licensing issue?" I asked. "No. Nobody's figured that out yet. They're still treating it as a technical failure." I nodded to myself. They will eventually. The error is logged clearly for anyone who knows where to look. "Geraldine, what do you want out of this? What's your end game here?" I considered his question carefully. "Recognition, respect, compensation for years of undervalued work, and yes, a formal apology for how I was dismissed. Put together your terms. I'll make sure they're presented to the board." By noon, my email inbox contained frantic messages from nearly every executive at NetSpan, including Austin himself. His message was particularly telling. "Whatever you did to sabotage our systems, we will hold you legally responsible." This kind of vindictive action is exactly why we needed to move beyond your outdated approaches. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I contacted Patricia Winters, a technology attorney I'd consulted years ago when drafting the original agreement. Within an hour, she had reviewed the contract and confirmed what I already knew. I was on solid legal ground. "They don't have a leg to stand on," Patricia assured me. "Your licensing rights are explicitly protected, and the termination clause is crystal clear. If anything, they're the ones in potential legal jeopardy for using your intellectual property without proper licensing after your termination." By 2 p.m., the CTO finally called, his voice a mixture of realization and resignation. "It's a licensing issue, isn't it?" "Yes, Thomas. It always was." The emergency board meeting lasted until well after midnight. I knew this because James texted me updates throughout the evening, his messages growing increasingly terse as the hours wore on. Austin still denying responsibility. Legal counsel confirming validity of your contract. CFO calculating potential losses, 7 figures per day. Austin suggesting legal action against you. Legal shot that down immediately. The final text came at 12:43 a.m. Board wants your terms tomorrow. Prepare accordingly. I spent Sunday morning with Patricia, drafting a comprehensive proposal. We were careful not to appear vindictive or opportunistic. This wasn't about extortion, but fair compensation for my intellectual property and professional dignity. The terms were straightforward. 1. Back payment of $750,000 for unlicensed use of my database architecture since termination. 2. A 2-year consulting retainer at $200,000 annually to ensure smooth transition and knowledge transfer. 3. Full ownership of my intellectual property to be formally acknowledged. 4. A public apology from the board for my improper dismissal. This is entirely reasonable, Patricia assured me, reviewing the document. If anything, you're undervaluing your contribution. At 2 p.m., my doorbell rang. I was surprised to find Thomas Lane, NetSpan's CTO, standing on my porch with an uncomfortable expression. The board sent me as their representative, he explained as I invited him in. They felt I might be more welcome than others. We sat in my living room, the tension palpable. Thomas had been with NetSpan almost as long as I had, though we'd never been particularly close. He had always been more focused on hardware infrastructure, while I handled the database architecture. I want to apologize personally, he began, his discomfort evident. I should have stepped in when Austin started pushing for your termination. I knew the value of your work, but I didn't fight hard enough to protect it, or you. I appreciated his candor, but remained guarded. Thank you for that, Thomas. But I assume you're here for more than just an apology. He nodded, reaching into his briefcase to retrieve a folder. The board has reviewed your terms, and they're prepared to accept them, with one modification. He slid a document across the coffee table. They're offering $1, $2 million for the back payment instead of $750,000, acknowledging that your initial figure was actually quite conservative given the potential damages. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the increased offer. And the other terms? Accepted as presented, including the public apology. They'd like to issue it tomorrow morning if possible. I took the document, scanning the terms carefully. Why the rush? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Every minute our systems remain down costs us approximately $40,000 in lost revenue and potential client damages. We've already lost several major accounts, with more threatening to leave if service isn't restored by morning. And Austin? Thomas's expression darkened. The board has asked for his resignation, effective immediately. His decisions created this crisis, and his attempts to blame you afterward only compounded it. James was particularly vocal about holding him accountable. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and regret. I had never wanted anyone to lose their job. I just wanted proper recognition for my own contributions. What happens now? I asked. If you sign this agreement, I have instructions to immediately implement the licensing key you provide. We can have systems back online within the hour. I studied Thomas's face, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his shoulders. The entire technical team had likely been working around the clock since Saturday morning. You haven't slept, have you? He offered a weary smile. None of us have. We've been trying every conceivable workaround, but your architecture is remarkably secure. For the first time since my termination, I felt a genuine sense of pride. It was designed that way. Monday morning, I walked into NetSpan headquarters, not as a disgraced former employee, but as a valued consultant. The atmosphere was noticeably different. Faces that had avoided eye contact during my humiliating exit now nodded respectfully as I passed. Word travels fast in tech companies, and everyone knew what had happened over the weekend. The systems had been restored Sunday evening after I provided the necessary licensing validation codes. The board's formal apology had been distributed company-wide at 8 a.m., acknowledging my invaluable contributions to NetSpan's core technology and expressing sincere regret for the manner of Ms. Knox's departure. It was carefully worded to avoid admitting legal wrongdoing while still giving me the recognition I deserved. I was escorted to the executive conference room, where the board members were assembled for a special meeting. James greeted me with a firm handshake, guiding me to a seat that had been positioned at the head of the table, a symbolic gesture that wasn't lost on me. "Gentlemen, ladies," James began, addressing the board. "I believe most of you have met Geraldine Knox, the architect of our core database framework, and now our most critical consultant. She has graciously agreed to help us transition to a sustainable knowledge management system over the next 2 years." Several board members nodded, though a few couldn't quite meet my eyes. I recognized them as the ones who had most enthusiastically supported Austin's modernization initiatives without understanding what they were dismantling. "Before we discuss next steps," James continued, "I want to express personally, on behalf of the entire board, our profound apology for what transpired. We failed in our oversight responsibilities and allowed a valuable team member to be mistreated." He turned to me. "Geraldine, the floor is yours." I hadn't prepared a speech, but the words came easily. I dedicated 15 years to building a system that would grow with NetSpan, one that could adapt to changing needs while maintaining rock-solid reliability. I never opposed innovation or modernization. I opposed reckless changes that risk the stability our clients depend on. The board members listened attentively as I continued. "My goal today isn't to dwell on past mistakes, but to establish a path forward. The database architecture needs documentation that others can understand. It needs a succession plan. And yes, it needs updating, but through careful evolution, not revolution." For the next hour, I outlined my vision for NetSpan's technical future. I explained how the existing architecture could be enhanced without being replaced, how younger developers could be trained to maintain and extend it, and how we could incorporate new technologies without abandoning what worked. As the meeting concluded, the CEO, who had wisely remained silent during Austin's campaign against me, approached with a somewhat chastened expression. "We've learned a painful lesson about valuing institutional knowledge," he admitted. "Sometimes the person who's been here the longest isn't an obstacle to progress. They're essential to it." I nodded, appreciating his candor. Experience and innovation aren't mutually exclusive. The best systems combine both. Later that afternoon, I ran into Douglas in the break room. His face lit up when he saw me. "You're back. I mean, I heard you were consulting, but—" "I'm back in a manner of speaking," I confirmed with a smile. "I'll be around to help with the transition." He lowered his voice. "Everyone's talking about what happened. Austin really had no idea about the licensing agreement?" He never bothered to ask. Never took the time to understand the foundation before trying to replace it. Douglas shook his head in disbelief. Wow. I can't imagine being that arrogant." "It happens more often than you'd think," I replied. "The tech industry sometimes values novelty over substance. New isn't always better. Sometimes it's just new." As I walked back toward my temporary office, I reflected on the events that had brought me here. I hadn't sought revenge so much as recognition. Sometimes the quietest coding contains the most powerful safeguards. 6 months into my consulting agreement, NetSpan was thriving again. Client confidence had been restored, and the technical team was stronger than ever, with a renewed appreciation for documentation and knowledge sharing. Austin's replacement, Vanessa Wright, was a pragmatic leader who valued both innovation and stability, a refreshing change from her predecessor's reckless approach. I had established a comprehensive training program for the younger developers, ensuring that my knowledge wouldn't remain siloed. Douglas had shown particular aptitude for understanding the database architecture, and was emerging as a natural successor to maintain it after my consulting period ended. The board had maintained a respectful distance, allowing me to work without interference while making it clear that my expertise was valued. James occasionally checked in, our old friendship gradually rekindling as we collaborated on long-term strategic planning. On a Wednesday afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor to my office, Patricia from Human Resources, the same woman who had processed my termination papers 6 months earlier. "I brought you something," she said, placing a manila envelope on my desk. It just came through from legal. Inside was a formal document acknowledging my intellectual property rights to the database architecture, now officially licensed to NetSpan under the terms we had negotiated. It was signed by every board member and included a personal note from the CEO. With our deepest appreciation for your contributions and our sincere apologies for failing to recognize them sooner. It was more than just a legal document. It was validation of 15 years of work, of countless late nights and weekends sacrificed to build something lasting. I ran my fingers over the embossed company seal, remembering the days when NetSpan was just 3 people in a garage with an ambitious dream. Thank you, Patricia. She nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. You know, after everything that happened, a lot of people expected you to be different. Vengeful, maybe. I smiled. I never wanted revenge. I just wanted respect. As Patricia left, I carefully placed the document in my portfolio. The victory wasn't in bringing NetSpan to its knees. It was in helping it stand stronger afterward. 1 year after my public dismissal, I found myself standing at a podium at the Ohio Technology Leadership Summit, delivering a keynote address titled Building Sustainable Systems, the Human Element in Software Architecture. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been invited specifically because of how the NetSpan situation had resolved. My case had become something of a cautionary tale in tech management circles, a perfect example of why companies should value their experienced engineers rather than rushing to replace them with younger, supposedly more innovative talent. Several industry publications had covered the story, though NetSpan had wisely refused to comment beyond their public apology. As I concluded my speech, the audience of technology professionals and executives gave an enthusiastic round of applause. During the Q&A session, a young woman raised her hand. Your database architecture saved NetSpan from collapse, but now you're actively teaching others how to maintain and eventually replace it. Aren't you undermining your own power by sharing your knowledge so freely? It was an insightful question, one that struck at the heart of what many people misunderstood about my actions. Knowledge isn't power when it's hoarded, I replied. It's power when it's properly valued. I never wanted to be irreplaceable. I wanted the systems I built to be understood and appreciated. The true failure at NetSpan wasn't just one director's arrogance. It was a culture that allowed critical knowledge to become mysterious, rather than documented and shared. After the summit, several companies approached me with consulting offers, including 2 of NetSpan's largest competitors. I declined politely, explaining that I was committed to completing my current engagement. The truth was more nuanced. I had no desire to leverage NetSpan's crisis for personal gain. My goal had never been to maximize profit, but to restore professional dignity. That evening, I received an email from Vanessa Wright with a simple subject line: "Thank you for rebuilding bridges instead of burning them." As I reflected on my journey from humiliation to vindication, I realized that the most satisfying revenge wasn't destruction, but creation, building a legacy that would outlast both crisis and triumph.